Hello everyone, and I hope you're well. Welcome to another episode of Not Another Whiskey Podcast. It's Mitch here, and I'm going solo again this week. Nicholas has been a bit busy running about in Vegas or doing something else, but I don't know anyway. So what I did was I decided to go out into my backyard with my good friend, Mr. Alan Winchester. Now, for those who haven't met or haven't heard of Alan Winchester before, he's the ex-master distiller for Glenlivet. He's been in the industry for almost 50 years, an incredible wealth of knowledge. So what we did was we jumped into the Cabrach. We talked about the history, the heritage of it, and he showed me some amazing illegal whiskey bothies. We sat down at his house afterwards and we had a good chinwag about everything to do with illegal whiskey making and the Cabrach, which is what his new project is now. Alan, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Yeah.
So, just to give everyone a little bit of background about yourself, and I'm gonna get you to do this in a second, but you started your career in whiskey in 1975.
That's spot on.
Yeah, master distiller at Glenlivet, obviously, which I know a lot of people will know you as, and then you've been in the you've been managing over 20 distilleries, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, Mitch. I used to count 22.
Okay.
You're going to ask me which ones they are, but yeah, 22.
And then Master Keeper of the Quake, Spirit of Speyside Lifetime Achievement Award. Am I making you blush yet? Is this...
I'm looking forward to hear myself speak.
But I know there's a load of other awards that you've had over your illustrious career, Alan, so... Amazing to have you on the show, and thank you so much for your time. And great day today. So to rewind a little bit and explain to everyone listening how we got here today, Alan and I went up to the Cabrach and we went on a massive hike, which I almost forgot my walking boots for, which would have been a disaster. Because when I say hike, I don't mean like a little trail. We were properly in the depths of the Cabrach, hunting out illicit whiskey stills, which I know is one of your hobbies, right? So let's start off with this, Alan. Before we get into your career, let's talk about the Bothy hunters that you do all the time and what this is all about.
Yeah, well, the Bothy hunters comes out of probably Stephen Sillett's book, The Illicit Scotch, but also then the research at the Cabrach Trust employed two researchers, historians, Keir German and Gregor Adamson, to do research on the roots of the Cabrach. And everybody had said, oh, there's not much about, there's not much here, but they exposed the Smuggler's Well, which we've just visited, up in the Cabrach. This a site for distilling, and it speaks so much to the landscape and of what the whisky industry was. That piqued the interest that maybe there is some more roots out there. And it is, Mitch, your recent podcast on the archaeological dig at Drummond Distillery, that crossover from the illicit still to the legal fascinates me. And that early part of the history fascinates me, as anything in the whisky industry it does, the history. And also unraveling the true stories there. Yeah. We also went to Smuggler's Well, but we also went to an undisclosed site with the water running hidden away from there, but we used it to top up our dram, to open up the dram. So there's a lot of that out there. And also folk are interested in that now, so we're seeing it all around the country. And it brings home how big an industry it was. A small industry because the Bothy wouldn't be distilling much more than a few anchors a week, but yet it was part of a massive industry in this part of the world.
Yeah, no, it was amazing today. I mean, to set the scene for everyone, we're gonna post some of this on our Instagram because we did a couple of videos when we were up there. But we went way into the hills of the Cabrach, and Alan took me to this amazing site that you believe that goes back to the probably early 1800s where they were making whiskey there, right?
Yeah, that's a good point because it never went straight out to these remote bothies. I reckon it went out because illicit distilling was confined into these remote parts of the Highlands, well, we're in the Highlands, but we're back onto lowland Aberdeenshire and that perfect mart. The whisky line that was put in the 1780s made this a different part from the lowlands, so they smuggled the whisky to there. And it became a large industry that, as the law adapted, changed. It speaks to the American story of the Whisky Rebellion, but as it changed, it pushed it out from the houses. Mm-hmm. It pushed it up into the more remote bits, as you could see today. But still not far from that longhouse down at Silverford, not far from houses. The most notorious smugglers in the Cabrach was the Bains from Powneed. They're only 2 miles from that spot. So they were obviously collecting it when they were driving their cattle down to maybe the lowlands, or just taking a string of ponies down to supply their customers in Aberdeen. So it's unearthing that things and what's left of it.
Yeah, and it was amazing going around the hills with you today. Just the amount of knowledge that you've got with regards to it is unbelievable, and the sites that you know. So I highly recommend it. Guys, if you're up in Dufftown at all, give Alan a shout. Get him to take get him to take you out in the hills with him. So, Alan, let's rewind a little bit. We mentioned earlier on that you were 50 years within the industry. How did this all come about, and did this sort of thirst for knowledge of whisky history, did you have that right at the start, or did that come after you got into whisky?
It's an accident. I was waiting to go for my medicals and my applications for the Royal and the Merchant Navy in 1975. Failed the medical, but the Easter before, when I finished doing my higher education, my mother says, "You're not sitting about here, there's a job at Glenfarclas Guide," so I applied for that. So I went up Glenfarclas. Well, I knew of Glenfarclas, I knew where it was. It was next door to my grandfather's, great-grandfather's farms. It was one of my first memories, was looking up to see that chimney, the red chimney, and the pagoda tower, or the cupola tower. And that was an early memory, but the early memory was the smell of the grains, the draff, being delivered to the farm to be ensiled for the subsequent winter. And that smell stuck with you.
Yeah.
I was also brought up in the village of Birkhead, when they were building the big drum maltons there. Oh, yeah. So I was aware of that. I remember the cars coming to the openings in the 60s. They'd got VAT 69 in their number plates. What was this all about? You in this area, you just begin to pick it up. But the job was an accident, so I didn't get a job. I enjoyed showing the visitors around. First book I bought is Michael Brander's original Scotch that was for sale at Glenfarclas. I bought it with my first wage, and that is my interest in the whisky industry, in the history of it, and that sort of looking into things. So I found that it was an industry I quite liked. At the end of the summer, the team gave me a job at Glenfarclas, and I stayed there for a few more years, and then I moved to a bigger company for a few years. I went back for a while and got my first distillery manager's post, was at Glenfarclas, and then left again, and I joined Pernod Ricard way back.
So that's interesting, because you must have been one of the first guides at Glenfarclas, because I think the time you're talking about, that's just when they opened up their visitor centre. It would have been a year after, or?
Yeah, I think Glenfarclas opened 73, the visitor centre was built. In those days, you had an off licence, you had to get a counter, you had to get your tab at the counter and go round the back and claim it an off licence, because there was a change in the law to allow the businesses to do, because when the Distilling Act was set up, they couldn't sell less than 9 gallons at the distillery. So it was the little anchor casks that they sold in those days. Huh. So that was a change. And then the visitors, Glenfiddich was early into visitors, Tormore. Mm-hmm. One of the redundant railway workers got a job at Tormore showing visitors round. We were speaking about Tormore, right beside the road. What a fantastic sight. Yeah. You stop, have a look at this grandeur. We used to stop, my father used to stop going to my grandfather in Dunfales, because you used to hear the the clock playing the tune every quarter of an hour. I remember as one of my managing jobs, we decided to get the clock going, and everybody complained about the noise all night, every quarter of an hour. So it was a thing. But I came by the other day, and it's at bang on time, so that's great to see. But that's the sort of feeling. So it just grew from that. It speaks to what we were doing today. We're out tramping in the hills. I love going up a mountain. I love walking. Going for a cycle, etc. As you can see, lots of braes up to the Cabrach, so it's a good place to train.
I know, you're a fit man. I was struggling to keep up with you today. Bloody hell.
Not at all.
So I want to get, I want to kind of go back a little bit as well. Tell us about your time at Glenlivet, because that must have been interesting. You were distillery manager there for a long time, and then you moved into this ambassadorial role, which is kind of the time that we met. I think it was about 2012 up in Scapa, and then we kept bumping into each other at various whiskey festivals. What did you prefer? Did you prefer your time as a distillery manager or as an ambassador?
Both, actually.
Yeah.
The market, right, let's play that one back. I was never the distillery manager, but I was the distilling manager in charge of the distillery. I was a brewer at Glenlivet. I actually bottled water at Glenlivet. I bottled Glenlivet spring water. Again, that was back to protecting the name Glenlivet, or the Glenlivet if it's Minmore Distillery. So that was fascinating time. So I had two spells there. Made dark grains at Glenlivet. Learnt all about that. Learnt about that aspects of it because I joined the Glenlivet distillers in the cooperage at Glengrant as a cooperage warehouse labourer. I'm not a debentured cooper. I only tightened the hoops for the coopers and worked in the warehouses, and then went through Glengrant, Capadonic, and then came up to Glenlivet, where I stayed for just a few years before leaving again. But great time, and then reunited with it with Pernod Ricard, and that was back in 2002. The takeover was 2001. 2002 we were back, and as general manager of the distilling operations, and then Allied was added to it. Well, the bit that I'm always proud of was part of the team that expanded the Glenlivet. And you used to say, the old guy says, when we expanded it the first time, that's a once in a lifetime career, and we then expanded it again. And that was a fantastic project to be involved. And this was along with projects going on in the company, like reopening Glenkeith, where I first went as a trainee brewer. That was my first management post. Reopening it was very satisfying. One of the guys had asked me years before, will we ever open Glenkeith? I said, nah, there's so much work needed and done. But yet the industry was growing. We'll have to look at Glenkeith. So I was proven wrong, but in a lovely way. And that was great to put back.
I think it's easier to ask you what job you haven't done within the whiskey industry than what you've done.
Yeah, I used to collect titles.
So, like, serious question, what would you say? Well, I'm going to start this off in a positive way. What are the good things now about whiskey production? What are the improvements that you've seen over time within your time within doing that?
There's a lot of improvement. Being a historian, there's a lot of good things there, and there's a lot of good things that you can build on. But if you asked me that in a practical sense of things, and you asked about the brand ambassador's role, which I didn't answer, it's great that we meet folk. The festivals opened up the distilleries that weren't open, so we would be involved in that. That was a chance for the folk coming to the festivals to meet the makers, which I think is a great thing. But the education of the industry is fantastic now. Now, that goes from the education. I joined the distillery, was thrown maybe a couple of notes or given the questions and answers book. There you go, that's something to read about. But a knowledge of that. Now, there's an Institute of Brewing and Distilling qualifications you go through. There's phenomenal online resources now. It's not the secret it was before. Yeah. This black art that we carry on in this building with a big sign, and you'll still see them in Speyside. Sorry, no visitors. They're not set up for it. But that's opened it up. The visitor centre, the tourism opened it up. That was a good thing for the industry and the area because it provided work. Because the distilleries became increasingly mechanised, automated. There's always been this urge to be mechanised, automated, whether it's the steam age, introduction, electric, computers, etc. That meant there was less folk, but the tourism opened that thing up. So that's always been big changes. Big changes being the move to single malt. How many distilleries were closed in the 1980s by, it's a good whisky for blending? Well, what does that mean? But now you can find most of these products. There's whiskies that would always have been considered a blender's malt. That's not to degenerate them, because you make high quality whisky for blending or single malt. But now there's more of a focus in the production that this whisky is destined for single malt. So it's the choice of cask for maturation. So there's lots of changes like that. Yeah. But it's just understanding of everything.
Yeah, and that's the positive side of thing. What would you say? What are things that you miss about the whiskey industry, like from the olden days when you first started? Is there anything that you think now it's like, I wish that hadn't changed, or that's bullshit?
I suppose it used to be at Glengrant, there used to be 4 or 5 of us in a shift. So there was a lot of banter. There was a lot of stories. I would pick up, I'd be like a sponge to these stories that the old guys would be saying, well, you see, we used to do it that way and we stopped doing it that way. And it was that. Now, I suppose that's why as mentoring folk nowadays is important that we give back, because that was our form of mentoring, was the profile. I was speaking to lads that were speaking about before the Second World War, and they would be speaking about the distillery before there was electric in it. How the one that always fascinated me was the story that the stillman used to say. He used to throw the coal into the fire, and the only thing you would hear was the rummager and the wash still, and you would hear the stills singing, the attenuation of sound as they boiled, and this is where you'd hear the stills singing, and that would tell you that it was at this point. So they knew that things. You can see that in sort of craft sort of things as well. But that was the style of industry that I joined that were speaking. But guys that would say to me, I don't know you so well, but I knew your grandfather, and I knew my time had been reached at retirement when I spoke to one of the stillmen. He says, you won't know me, but you'll know my grandfather. And I says, it's come quite full circle now. So that's the sort of thing. But yeah, that's a thought that I look back at fondly. And also workforces at Glengrant, Cabrach, there was 55 of us in that community working in that distillery at that time, where it's fairly automated now.
And over that time as well, you must have some funny stories from your production days. What's like, if there's one, is there one highlight, like something that obviously there's probably stories that we could set up a couple of drams and you'd tell me and you wouldn't want them recorded, but is there anything that we can record that you can put on this?
I have mentioned this one, but you know how you're young and you develop an interest in it and you're becoming, I want to be different, you can drive it forward. And I always remember, and it was early on in my career, I was in the spirit still at Glenfarclas, and the spirit still had to be cleaned weekly at that time. The reason being it, and it probably is still the same at Glenfarclas, but there may be a spray now, but it was direct fired. So the grease and that would burn onto the side of the still. So every week you climbed into the still, and there were so big stills at Glenfarclas that 4 of you could fit in and clean a quarter of the still each. And I'm young and I'm enthusiastic. I'm going to clean this still, better than everybody. And I'm hosing the top of the still. And it's like what I did to you. I took your arm today and stopped you in the hill. And he stopped me. I says, what? He says, don't hose the top of the still. He says, the copper patina, he says, the top of the still, if you upset that, you'll change the flavour of the whisky. Oh, here we go again. These old traditional stories and that. So as years later, we were looking at a compound and how we would take it out of the spirit. It was the 80s, 90s, a few decades on. And I always remember the chemists from, I think it was SWRI at the time, said, don't touch the patina, the top of the spirit still. It's an important part of the copper catalytic converter. And I remembered saying, my goodness, Robbie, you were correct. I was so enthusiastic. That sort of knowledge was known, but they didn't understand the science. Right. The science unlocked that empirical knowledge. So you dismiss anything at your peril. And that was, I thought, well, yeah. That's me caught out again.
the old boys knew better, right?
Well, he knew something, and it was he was from a long line of folk that had worked at that company.
Yeah. So, well, let's discuss. You're now retired, but you're not really retired. Like most of the legends that I know within the whiskey industry, you guys all retire and then you go, actually, I'm just going to go on and do this. So I think it was last year that it was announced that you were going to be working on this new project where we just were up at the Cabrach. So let's chat a little bit about this. We walked, you took me around this distillery that's going to open up shortly, and again, I've taken some pictures so you guys can see them on Instagram. It's amazing to see it. Yeah. Because what are we looking at? A year? No, around about a year when this is going to open?
We're hoping to produce whiskey within this year.
Okay, so by the end of 2023.
Yeah, we've set that target, but it may be a moving target. But no, we've set a target for ourselves. Hopefully, we heard that 2 weeks' time that the roofs should be going back onto the building because they are off just now. Yeah. The equipment's made. Forsyths have made the 3-pot stills. The wooden washbacks, they're made locally. They're ready. They'll be ready to go. The mash tun's made. So we're well on with the construction of the equipment, etc. So we just have to get going with the building.
And this isn't a big distillery that's getting built here. Just to explain to the listeners, if you go up to the Cabrach, it's a very desolate place. The history of it is, we were chatting about the clearances and everything, and that kind of hit the Cabrach in a big way. And I think population, what is the population right now? It's
just a handful, just a few families and a number of the farms in the upper Cabrach. Some of the houses have been done up. The lower Cabrach is in a slightly better situation, but the population's been a steady decline, and that decline's been going on for the last 200 years, exacerbated by the passing of the Distilling Act, exacerbated by the First World War. I think Sam at the Cabrach always says that the per capita loss of life in the Cabrach proportionally was so high in the Cabrach. The War Memorial has only been erected in the last few years by the Trust and its supporters, because the grave, the memorial in the church is just a brass plaque with the names, Gordons, etc., all the names you would expect from that part of the country. But it suffered, and yet it sits 8.5 miles from Dufton, this big whisky centre, and yet it was a whisky centre of fame in the illicit time. It was top billing in America, in Aberdeen, which was the other side of the world from the Cabrach, with Glenlivet at that time. They had legal distilleries, 3 which failed. We were looking over to Black Middens. It failed. Well, it failed. They went out and concentrated more on the agricultural side, finding it more difficult to do business from the Cabrach, and that was a consequence of that. But it's like an island. Jonathan, who's the CEO there, describes it as an island. It sits in the corner of Speyside and region, and it's an area that time seems to have passed by. The houses are empty. There's lots of ruins. We're in a desolate landscape where it wasn't. So the idea of the trust and the ownership of the distillery belongs to the trust is for profit for the community, and it'll pour money back into that. So it's so nice it's always nice to be involved in a new distillery, but taking something back to life that probably creates a thing. The growth of the craft movement throughout the world. Why not the Cabrach? Why not take a few bits of life there? Great to see the barley growing in the field in front of the house today.
Yeah.
Typical, the farmer as usual saying, well, there's a bit patchy and a bit, but it looks pretty good to me, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, and we are talking proper craft here with this distillery. I mean, it'd be great for you if you can tell some of the stats of the distillery. We're chatting about just 100,000 litres that's going to come out. But I think the thing that was interesting for me was this buck still that you were talking about.
Ah, right. Yeah, the buck. Well, we're going to make Cabrach whiskey in the wash still and the spirit still. 2 stills, yeah, pretty straightforward. But we'll have the third still, the buck still. So the Black Middens Farm, which is not a nice name, and translated in English, it's not a nice name, so they called it the back after the prominent, the feature. We think at the archaeological research that's been done in the back is that they were allowed to distill with 1 pot still. So there was a, what would you say, there were an allowance under the 1823 Act where you needed 2 stills. They made it with 1 still. And we're going to try and recreate that with its direct fire, with its worm tabs. Now the mash tun for the distillery is only half a ton per batch. It will fill a wash back, so that will give us 2,500 litres of wash. 2,500 litres can go to the Cabrach still, so it's a big still, but the buck still will be half the size again. So we're nearly pushing it right back to what they had, in a sense, and using local cereal, but we know that they were so successful in the Cabrach, they had to import grain, but we reckon that Laureate will grow well in the Cabrach, and we'll take grain from the local area to convert it in, like what the old distillers would have done.
That's amazing. I'm looking forward to seeing this opening up, and I think it's going to be a fantastic project. It's great to see this whole community aspect of it and everything going back in it. So, as I always do, Alan, I want to do some quick fire round questions. You ready for these?
Yes.
This is the bit that everyone gets a little bit nervous about sometimes. All right, so best Glenlivet that you were involved in making?
Oof.
Or talking about, or I think there's one obvious one that I can think of that you might say, might have had your name on it.
that was a project. It was done in. My name was considered very English. Winchester, it's old capital of England. It's because we came up here to deal out a bit of Christianity to the Scots up here. So I've claimed that I've been in spirits for hundreds of years.
Like what you did there. Like what you did there.
Yeah. So that was the joke. Your name's too English, but things had changed, and I was working with the team. How we get to promote the 50-year-old or speak about it, what we're going to do with it. And I didn't know at the time until it was released that they actually put my name. So that was a great honour. That was quite an honour with that.
And that was a 50-year-old as well, right?
That was a 50-year-old. But there's some fantastic Glenlivets. In fact, and one of the ones that gave us a lot of fun was the one I did, speaking about as a brand ambassador as well as a master distiller, I should say. But you do the brand promotion work. Was the first the one that we did with the cognac cask. And that was fascinating. We took that out when it was 100 years since the captain took over the distillery, and it was round about that time. And I thought, I love that historic connection to that. But it was the introduction again back, because we took the cognac cask. My predecessor, Jim Cryle, was involved in the French oak finish for the 15. And he was involved in that. He thought that the brandy casks, the French oak, would work really well with the whiskey. And everybody had said, you better watch what you're doing, you know. But Jim had went to France, to Martel at the time, and he saw that they put the new cognac in the new cask only for a year, and then they took it out and they put it in another cask. And that was it would take a big infusion from the cask. So he thought he would do it in reverse. So he did it as a finish. I don't know what we'll call it now because it's a reserve or something. But a portion of the Glenlivet was put into these casks. And then when it was deemed to have picked up the character, it was then blended back into the... married back into the Glenlivet to produce the French cask finish. So we did it with the cognac cask, or the team did it with the cognac cask, and it was great to be part of that.
So this is a serious one here, Alan. If you could rewind 50 years and become the successful distillery manager that you've already become, but it had to be with another whiskey distillery, outside of any that you've worked, which one would it be?
Well, it's quite easy that. I think it would be Glenvore and Inverness.
Oh, yes.
Simply because my great granny was a half brother of John Burney that started it. John Burney did his time at Benrinnes with his brother William. He went in Glenalbyn. He was thwarted in getting his directorship, so he crossed the road with McKinley's money and I think Johnny Walker's money maybe at some point, and built McKinley's and Burney Glenvore distillery. It was still in operation. I used to go through Inverness, going to the hills and the west coast, and you would, at that time, the 3 distilleries were Malton, and also Baird's was Malton, which is still there. Melbourne was Malton, Glenalbyn, Glenmore, and you would get these distillery smells as you drove through because there was no Keswick Bridge, and that was a thing. And I would have loved to have worked there, been manager or something that was connected.
There you go.
They probably didn't know about the connection, but that would have been a thing like that, yeah.
Proudest moment of your career?
Well, Mitch, we were together the night when I got the Lifetime Achievement. You say, well, I must be at the end of the road now. I've got the Lifetime Achievement. I think anything that marks that speaks again. But again, that speaks to, not to me, but to the folk I've worked with to support that through the years. There's been some fantastic folk I've worked with that shared their stories with me. Some of them funnier stories than I can tell, but they could tell lots of stories. So I think it's just the culmination of that. I'm always proud of these things.
Yeah, as you should be. It's amazing. Best story from your ambassador days with Glenlivet?
All right.
Now that you've left, you can spill the beans on all this. You know, there's no PR breathing down your neck or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think I was over the last time I travelled the company. I did Japan and New Zealand and that, and the brand ambassador. He's now the guy that's in the visitor centre at Abelair, Thomas. I thought, poor Thomas, he's working with me. It must be care in the community, because on his day off, I said, I'm going down to visit Fujigatembe tomorrow. Right. How do I know to go to the train? Well, he says, you go to the train station and you catch the train. Oh, right, okay, I've got that. But how do I know when I get there? He says, look at your watch, and if it'll be 9:16, you just jump off the train. But poor Thomas had to come out and make sure I got on the train. It was like care in the community. So I felt like, of course, these young brand ambassadors, not only have they to go and then they have me coming along, making life so much harder for them. But I was amazed with the fun that they had, and he would take me, and I was eating things that I would have never eaten. But travel broadens the mind, and it was a good thing. But there was a funny. Ian Logan tells it. I just did it as a joke, but it was probably quite nasty. And I said they were setting up the hotel for the 50-year-old on the Robson, and I turned to the young lassie. You come to a point in your career that folk take everything literal, and I says, "Oh, it's a shame we've spelt the whiskey the wrong way." oh my goodness, it was just like a pheasant being run over. There was feathers everywhere. I said, I'm joking. Ian says, you're terrible. But I said it in my droll face. You know?
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think that's the funny thing about when you go abroad and you're Scottish, you say stuff like that and people just take it. No, I'm joking. Chill out. It's okay. Well, Alan, it's been amazing having you on the show. I'm glad we made this happen because we have been talking to, well, I mentioned this about a year ago to get you on and you were like, yeah, whatever. And then interestingly enough, this is how this comes about. Last week, Alan happened to listen to a couple of episodes on the show and that's how I've got him on now. So it's been a long time in the making, Alan. Fascinating to hear your stories. And guys, check out the Cabrach Trust as well. They're on Instagram. There is a website as well that people can go and see. Is that right?
Developing the website as well.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And then, obviously when the distillery opens up next year, looking at 2014, there's going to be a visitor centre there.
Yeah.
Is there going to be like a cafe? Did I read that? Or is that not part of the plans?
I think that might ultimately be part of the master plan in a few years. But we'll establish the whisky, establish the visitors' connections with it. And yes, that would be the idea. Yeah, if you make it the Cabrach, you deserve a cup of tea.
But definitely another great thing to come and visit up at Speyside for sure when that opens up. But Alan, absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
That was good.
Thank you for the hike today as well. Yeah.
Brilliant.